The old ranger always said a campfire was more than warmth. It was hope. On the night the world ended, I finally understood what he meant. The flames crackled softly between the three of us, sending a shower of orange sparks into the cold night. Beyond the circle of light, the Australian bush was swallowed by darkness. The trees stood perfectly still, as though they were listening. No wind, no birds, not even insects, just silence. I'd been walking for 2 days before I found the fire. The man tending it never asked my name. He simply looked at the blood drying on my sleeve and nodded toward an empty log. Sit. I didn't argue. The third survivor was already there, wrapped in an old blanket with a backpack clutched tightly against his chest. He stared into the flames without speaking. For a long time, none of us said anything. Then the older man broke the silence. "Whatever you hear tonight," he said quietly, "don't leave the light." I looked at him. "What are they?" He poked the fire with a long branch. "I don't know." That answer somehow frightened me more than if he'd called them monsters. Hours passed. The fire became the center of our tiny world. Everything beyond it ceased to exist. Eventually, the young man spoke. I was driving south when the radio stopped. His voice trembled. They said there'd been riots, then evacuations, then nothing. He swallowed. I stopped for fuel at a roadhouse. He never finished the sentence. He didn't have to. I'd seen enough abandoned towns to imagine the rest. The older man nodded slowly. "They're everywhere now." "Do they hunt?" I asked. "No." "They chase people?" "No." "Then what do they do?" He looked into the darkness. "They wait." The silence returned. It wasn't peaceful. It felt heavy, like the bush itself was holding its breath. Somewhere beyond the trees. Crunch. Every one of us froze. A single footstep. Nothing else. The older man calmly placed another branch onto the flames. The fire flared brighter. The sound stopped. I stared into the darkness, trying to see what had made the noise. There was nothing. Only black trees. Around midnight, I couldn't ignore it anymore. "I think someone's out there." The old ranger nodded. "There is." "Why aren't they coming closer?" "They don't cross the fire." I almost laughed. "Seriously? I've watched them for 3 nights." He looked directly at me. "They'll stand there until sunrise if they have to." I wanted to ask why. Instead, crunch. Another footstep, closer this time. The young man gripped his backpack so tightly his knuckles turned white. "They're getting nearer." "No," the ranger replied. "We're getting quieter." I realized then that the fire wasn't loud. It hissed, it cracked, it breathed. Without those sounds, the footsteps became easier to hear. One, another, another. Slow, patient, never rushing. As though whoever stood beyond the trees knew exactly how the night would end. The pile of firewood was shrinking. I'd been pretending not to notice. So had everyone else. Finally, the ranger sighed. "That's the last of it." None of us moved. The young man looked around the campsite. "There has to be more." "There isn't. We can gather some." The ranger shook his head. "Not after dark." "Then what do we do?" Nobody answered. The flames continued to dance. Smaller now. Lower. The warmth began to fade. Minutes passed. The first cold breeze of the night drifted through the trees. With it came a smell. Wet earth, rotting leaves, something else, something sweet, the kind of sweetness that shouldn't exist in the middle of nowhere. The ranger noticed me smelling the air. "They're close. How do you know?" "They always smell like that." Then, a figure stepped into view. Not fully, just enough for the firelight to touch one shoulder. It didn't move. It simply stood there, watching. Its clothes were torn, its head tilted slightly, almost curious. Then another shape appeared between two trees. Then another. Then another. None of them crossed the light. None of them made a sound. There were dozens, maybe more, standing just beyond the reach of the flames. Waiting, the young man stood suddenly. "I'm leaving." The ranger grabbed his arm. "You'll die." "I'll die if I stay." He pulled free. "I can't sit here anymore." He took one step beyond the firelight. For a heartbeat. Nothing happened. He looked back at us. "I told you." Then every shadow moved at once. It wasn't a charge. It wasn't screaming. It was worse. Silent. Fast. The darkness swallowed him before he could even cry out. The bush became still again. His backpack lay just outside the light. Nothing else remained. Neither of us spoke. The ranger simply stared into the flames. "They learn," he whispered. "They always find the impatient ones." The fire was almost gone. Only glowing coals remained. I could feel the cold creeping closer. "So what happens now?" He smiled sadly. "Now we wait for morning." The first hint of dawn appeared behind the trees. Grey light spilled across the bush. One by one, the figures disappeared, not running, not hiding, simply walking back into the forest as though they had all the time in the world. When the sun finally rose, there wasn't a single sign they'd ever been there. Only footprints surrounding our camp, hundreds of them, all stopping at the edge of the fire's blackened ring. The ranger stood slowly, picked up his pack, and scattered dirt across the last glowing ember. Before leaving, he looked back at me. "Tonight you'll find another fire." He paused, and when someone asks why you never let it go out, he glanced toward the trees. "Don't tell them what you saw. Tell them what waited." I watched him disappear into the morning mist. For a long time, I stood alone beside the cold ashes. Then I heard it. A single footstep from somewhere deep in the forest.